This is the Basho, the narrow road to the deep north, but we're reading from the records of a weather-exposed skeleton, page 51. Following the example of the ancient priest who is said to have traveled thousands of miles carrying naught for his provisions and attaining the state of sheer ecstasy, under the pure beams of the moon I left my broken house on the river Sumida on the August of the first year of Jokyo among the wails of the autumn wind. Poem. Determined to fall, a weather-exposed skeleton, I cannot help the sore wind blowing through my heart. After 10 autumns in Edo, my mind points back to it as my native place. I crossed the barrier gate of Hakone on a wet, rainy day. All the mountains were deeply buried behind the clouds. In a way, it was fun not to see Mount Fuji in foggy rain. That's a poem. In a way, it was fun not to see Mount Fuji in foggy rain. On this journey, I am accompanied by a young man named Churi, who kindly assumes the position of a servant and renders what help he can for my benefit along the way. He is a man of true affection and trustworthy enough to be called a friend in need. Do you remember we read this? I left my master's house. Poem. I left my master's house in Fukagawa, leaving its Basho tree in the care of Mount Fuji. That's written by Churi. That's his assistant. That's what it says, written by Churi. Must be. As I was plodding along the river Fuji, I saw a small child, hardly 3 years old. Remember this part? You want me to read it? Okay, then I'll skip. The day I wanted to cross the river I rained from morning till night. I was held up by the swollen river. Poem by Churi. A long rainy day of autumn. My friends in Edo are perhaps counting the days, thinking of us at the river Oi. A scene before my eyes. Poem. Roses of Sharon at the roadside, perishing one after another in the mouth of a horse. I traveled a few miles on horseback, half asleep with my whip swinging by my side, exactly in the manner of the Chinese poet Toboku. There was an aged moon, fainter, hanging in the sky, while the foot of the mountains was dark as a hollow. It was a bit too early even for the first cockcrow, but my dreams were suddenly interrupted when my horse came to the steep precipice of Seiyo no Nakayama. Poem. Half asleep on horseback, I saw, as if in a dream, a distant moon and a line of smoke for the morning tea. I went down to Ise, where I spent 10 days with a friend named Fubaku. I visited the outer shrine of Ise one evening, just before dark. The first gate of the shrine was standing in the shadow, and the lights were glimmering in the background. As I stood there, lending my ears to the roar of pine trees upon distant mountains, I felt move deep in the bottom of my heart, in the utter darkness of a poem, in the utter darkness of a moonless night. A powerful wind embraces the ancient cedar trees. I do not wear a single piece of metal on my belt, nor do I carry anything but a sack on my shoulders. My head is clean shaven. I have a string of beads in my hand. I am indeed dressed like a priest, but priest I am not, for the dust of the world still clings to me. The keeper of the inner shrine prevented me from entering the holy seat of the god, because my appearance was like a Buddhist priest. Because he was dressed like a Buddhist priest. At the bottom of the valley, where the ancient poet Saggio is said to have erected his hermitage, there was a stream, and a woman was washing potatoes. Poem. The poet Saggio would have written a poem even for the woman washing potatoes. So he would have written her a poem. Yeah. Towards the end of the day, I stopped at a small tea house where a young woman named Butterfly handed me a small piece of white silk and asked me to write a poem choosing her name as the subject. Poem, a butterfly poised on a tender orchid. How sweetly the incense burns on its wings. I visited a poet at his hermitage. Poem, an ivy spray trained up over the wall, and a few bamboos inviting a tempest. At last I reached my native village in the beginning of September, but I could not find a single trace of the herbs my mother used to grow in front of her room. The herbs must have been completely bitten away by the frost. Nothing remained the same in my native village. Even the faces of my brothers had changed with wrinkles and white hair, and we simply rejoiced to see each other alive. My eldest brother took out a small omelet bag and said to me as he opened it, "You see your mother's frosty hairs? You are like Urashima, whose hair was turned white upon his opening a miracle box." After remaining in tears for a few moments, I wrote, Poem. Should I hold them in my hand, they will disappear in the warmth of my tears, icy strings of frost. Crossing over to the country of Yamato, we came to a village called Takenochi in the province of Kasusuki. This is where my companion Kiri was born. We spent several days resting our tired feet. There was a house deeply buried in a bamboo thicket. Poem. Sweet as a lute falls on my ears, the plucking of a cotton bow in a dark bamboo recess. I saw a huge pine tree, probably over 1,000 years old, in the garden of Tama Temple at the foot of Mount Futagami. The trunk was large enough to hold a bull, As I stood in front of this tree, I felt a strange sense of awe and respect, for though the tree itself was a cold, senseless object, it had survived the punishment of an axe for so many years under the divine protection of Buddha. Home. How many priests, how many morning glories have perished under the pine, eternal as law? Question. I wandered by myself into the heart of the mountains of Yoshino. White masses of clouds were piled up over the peaks, and all the valleys were filled with smoky rain. Teeny houses of woodcutters were scattered along the mountainsides, and the sound of an axe on the western slope was echoed by the mountains on the east. The bells from various temples struck deep to the innermost part of my being. Many ancient poets had chosen to live among these mountains, completely isolated from the rest of the world. It was only natural for them to compare these mountains with the Mount Rosan in China. I lodged at an annex of a certain temple. In the utter silence of the night I wrote poem. Beat your falling block, and let me at least hear its sound, my dear temple wife. The grassy hermitage of Segyo was about 200 yards behind the innermost temple of Yoshino. It was separated by a steep valley and approachable only by a narrow trail covered with leaves. The famed spring was just as it had been when the poet described it, shedding its clear drops of water with a drip-drop sound. Poem. I like to wash, by way of experiment, the dust of this world. The dust of this world in the droplets of dew. If Kaiku had escaped from this wicked king and come to Japan, he would have certainly cleansed his mouth with the water of this spring. And similarly, if Kyoyu had heard about this spring, he would have come all the way to wash his defiled ears. When I finally decided to descend the mountain in the late afternoon, the sun of autumn was pouring its almost level light. So I skipped all other famous places and went directly to the mausoleum of Emperor Godako. These references have footnotes if we want. Maybe we should read footnotes. Poem, The Weedy Grass, called Reminiscence of the bygone days in front of the mausoleum. Stopped by road on April 9, page 57. We're stopping the readings of the weather. This one is a travel sketch, The Weather Exposed Skeleton, from Basho. The Japanese translator, Nobuyuki Yuasa.